Hello, and welcome back to the Battle Frontier podcast, where we aim to help you level up in your journey as a competitive Pokemon TCG player. I'm Aaron Curry, here with me as always with my co-host John Orgel, and this week we're going to jump into a time capsule going over another 2010 deck ahead of that 2010 side event at NAIC in a couple of weeks. Then we will dive right into Blaine's quiz show before we hit up the results, including conversion rates and final standings, with some standout decks coming from those standings of the Portland Regional that happened this past weekend. So a little bit light on content this week, but nevertheless, we wanted to pump out an episode for y'all. And so, before we really get into the meat of that content, though, John, what were you up to this weekend?
Oh, yeah, I had a really nice weekend. My wife and I went to visit our friends out in Virginia Beach, and we just had a really chill, like board game centered brewery hopping, beer drinking, cookout having Memorial Day weekend where we
Nice.
just kind of chilled out. Like Saturday, we went around town, like got breakfast at like a nice bakery and coffee at a nice place, and then got lunch at a really good burger place, and then went to a brewery and played some games. Played, what was it called? Something like a little bit clever or a little clever. It's like a roll and write, just with a strategy element. Played that, and then went to a nice Italian restaurant Saturday, and then on Sunday we just had a cookout. I literally slept in a hammock for 2 hours, woke up, started drinking beer, and then had a lot of grilled meat, and had a nice chill time. Played Seven Wonders Duel versus my friend Matt, and that was a fun game. I hadn't played that before. Just lots of board games and lots of great time, and just relaxed a lot, which was nice. Like I hadn't had a weekend where like we didn't have a bunch planned in a while. Not that I was doing a whole lot the last few weeks, but like it's still nice to like just like truly relax, like have nothing to do in a day. Like I haven't had that in a long
having the
time.
extra day as an excuse to kind of kick back definitely helps with that. I want to ask, so I've been having conversations with people about breweries. Does like the atmosphere at this place, is it like a family environment?
The
Like do
one
they
we went to,
do they allow kids?
yeah, I think most breweries do allow kids. This one probably less so than other ones I've
Okay.
seen, but it definitely was more of a family friendly environment. Like there were people, like young couples with their new baby
Oh,
in like
okay.
one part of the booth, like in another part of the brewery. And then yeah, like some just regular like dads and whatever hanging out at the
Okay.
bar. So
Well,
it
it's
had a
weird.
bar, it had a bunch of tables, and a bunch of people were like, we were playing board games the whole time. So
Sure.
it was a nice, like well lit, nice, safe environment. So yeah.
Like they've converted this like culture of being more inviting and opening, where it used to just be like, no, you're only going to go to the like a brewery. It's basically just a bar that had fresher beer. And now you get this instead thing where you can go with your friends and you can just go hang out, and it's not kind of, I don't know, depressing is probably not the right word, but but
Yeah.
it's, they're typically livelier than what I figure people would have thought breweries were like a decade ago.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we go to breweries a good bit. I think millennials have really reinvented like drinking for their own generation, and like breweries are a big part of that. And then,
Sure.
you'll have live music there, and you'll like just have a beer listening to something, and have your dog or have your like newborn kid,
Yeah.
usually if you're a millennial, or like 3 or 4 year oold. Yeah, I don't think I would be comfortable. Well, no, I'd probably be okay with like my brother like has a 6 year old. He'll bring her when we go to the brewery, me and him. So I mean, it's not, like there's stuff for them to do, and
Yeah.
like, some of them have a playground even. So I don't know. I think they're pretty family centered nowadays. But yeah, it is interesting. Breweries are definitely different culture than like hardcore drinking dive bars for sure.
Right. Right. No,
Um,
it's not just like a pool table,
yeah,
a jacked up dartboard, and like a sticky floor.
no, it's very different.
Yeah.
But I like it. It's a more, I don't want to say it's like better, but it's just different. But I like it. I mean, it's fun to like, and I like craft beer, but like I don't drink IPAs, so that's always
I
tough.
can't, man. They taste like soap to me.
Yeah, they taste like pine tar to me, like just straight up like you're sucking on like a ball of sap or something. I don't know. It's gross.
Jeez.
But yeah, my favorite is like the European style cafe. If I had to pick like one place to go and drink at, it'd be like there's a beer cafe in Richmond. Shout out the Cask Cafe if you guys ever go to Richmond and are of drinking age. Don't push your luck there. But if you're of drinking age and enjoy beer, this place is like my favorite. It has one TV, and it's either playing soccer or it's off, and that's it.
Oh wow.
And like they make their own like really good sandwiches. Like they make their own salami and like cured meats, and then the beer selection is about like 15 beers, and they're all like just German or specific craft beer styles.
Okay.
And it's just a good, and like they have wine, and they have seltzer, and cider, but it's a beer focus for sure. But it's a great, like, it's a converted old garage essentially. Like somebody used to repair cars in this building, and then they took all that out and then put a nice bar, and then but they kept the roll up windows, so like when the weather's not bad,
Oh sure.
they just have those up, and you just got like an open air vibe, like a very European feel, which is pretty nice. So shout outs. And then yeah, if you guys ever come to Richmond, hit me up. We'll go to the Gas Cafe.
Well, yeah, fair enough.
But
So,
anyway, yeah, enough about me. How was your weekend, man?
Pretty good. My wife and I actually had our 12th wedding anniversary on Saturday.
Nice.
So,
Congrats.
getting there. It's weird. It's like 10 felt like a big milestone, but this is still, it's another year. It's definitely up there, and it feels almost like an accomplishment in some ways. But so we did that. We went to a decent restaurant. I think it's a chain. It's called Cooper's Hawk.
Yeah, they have some of those in Richmond, I think.
It's nice. Their food's good. They've got a good
Nice.
gluten-free selection. They've got a nice wine selection. So we went there, and we actually went for lunch, and they had a brunch thing that they were doing that weekend. So we ended up with a pitcher of sangria and just had some good food, and then went out, shopped a little bit, and ended up coming home. Played some board games over at my sister-in-law's house. We played a card game called Wizard, which is just a standard trick-taking game, except instead of like similar to spades kind of, except well, maybe hearts is a better example, but you're only bidding your hand, and there are some wild cards that are added into the mix to kind of spice it up a little bit. But yeah, did that, and then yesterday just got some like yard work stuff done. Went and jumped in the pool because it is still hot in Florida.
Dude, it was so cold up here. It's crazy, right? Like today when I woke up and like stepped out the door, it was 54 degrees out.
That's crazy. My truck the other day told me that it was 105 degrees on its thermometer. Now, granted, that's a metal vehicle sitting in the sun all day.
Yeah, baking in an oven,
but still, it's pretty hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, other than that, pretty low key weekend. We went and saw the new Lilo and Stitch movie yesterday with our son, and it was pretty good. Like, it was basically one for one with the cartoon, except they removed one of the characters, which felt a little weird to me. It just kind of felt like they must have run out of money in their CGI budget, or not wanted to commit enough money into their CGI budget to animate that alien. It's like the big.
Who was the alien? The John whatever.
No, the.
You're good, man.
Gantu, I think, like the big shark guy.
Okay.
He was just not there.
Sure.
So the whole bad guy was just like the scientist that was trying to like get Stitch back.
Gotcha.
But it was pretty well animated, but most of the story beats and most of the stuff that happened was like one for one with the cartoon. But it was still enjoyable. Like, I think I would say that's one of my favorite Disney movies. And so it was cool to see it get a comeback. But yeah, I think that is enough non-Pokemon talk for the week. We're approaching 15 minutes in. So why don't we go ahead and jump into our time capsule for the week. And so like we said, going into these, we're going to be doing exclusively 2010 decks as we approach this official 2010 side event. Even though it's not going to be some crazy drawn out thing, it still feels like the right time to feature some of these decks as opposed to others.
My deck this time around is Healix from Erik Nance, who got 16th place with this. I think this was back when we had top 32. So he lost in the first round of ASIM.
Yep.
or not ASIM, but
Well,
top
first round of
32.
top 32. It was a
Yeah,
brutal top cut too. He hit the only
yeah,
SP deck that had a fire card in it.
yeah. So it was who is it? Not
I
Chase. Was it
I can't remember. It was
no?
somebody from, I believe, Hong Kong.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, so but this deck, I think if you play this tournament again, is one of the most well positioned decks in this meta. In a heavy format where stuff doesn't really take one shots, you have what is considerably the most tanky Pokemon in this format, and it might not look like it now, but Steelix Prime with 140 HP is a metal Pokemon. It has a Pokebody that is perfect metal. It says it can't be affected by any special conditions, which is relevant. There's poison, and some decks sought to use paralysis like Gliscor or something like that. But it's really good for its attacks. Energy Stream for 2 colorless. It says search your discard pile for an energy and attach it to Steelix. And then Gaia Crush for 2 metal and 3 colorless just does 100, and then you can discard any stadium card in play. So you would just basically set up one Steelix in the active and then use a bunch of things to heal it. Steelix had access to double colorless energy, so you could easily power up Energy Stream. Doing 30 damage a lot, doing 30 damage repeatedly doesn't really seem that good, but this deck was all about like a war of attrition. You had a lot of things to increase its HP. Primarily, you had Expert Belt, which gave all the Pokemon that this was attached to 20 more hit points and allows them to do 20 more damage, but your opponent gets to take an extra prize card when they knock out this Pokemon. So basically, you would use double colorless energy early game, and then you would put your special metal energy in the discard pile. This was a special energy at the time that says that all damage done to your Pokemon that have this attached to it it's reduced by 10 damage if it's a metal Pokemon. And yeah, and if it's not a metal Pokemon, it just provides a metal energy. It doesn't have the secondary effect.
Right.
So you would basically just put as many special energies you could get. You put 4 on there, and with an expert belt, Steelix has an effective 200 hit points, and nothing came close in this format to getting 200 hit point, like doing that much damage. Maybe one of the legends, like Lugia Legend, I think, was in this format.
I think that I'm pretty sure that card only did 150. I mean, I can pull it up real
Okay.
quick, but I can look it up while you keep going.
Yeah, but relatively speaking, like not much is going to be able to one shot you, and even if they do, they're not going to be able to do it again. Like if they get that one hit KO or whatever. Like I remember Gallade has like an attack that you flip over all your prize cards and you're able to like stretch and hit a decent amount.
Yeah, the
So
Gallade for sure fell short. The Gallade would only do 180 max.
yeah, but that was enough a lot of times, but that's still not enough to, if you get it all fully powered up and everything going in your way, you can't quite get the knockout. And the main way that this deck sought to, like, you would keep your Steelix alive by healing it with all the healing cards in this format. So and they're not really particularly strong cards. They're very coin flip heavy. You had Life Herb, which said flip a coin. If heads, you heal 60 damage and remove all special conditions from one of your Pokemon. And then you had Moo Moo Milk, which you choose one of your Pokemon and then flip 2 coins for each heads, heal 30 damage from that Pokemon. So it's like it's like a theoretical potion that could potentially do a little bit better. And I think at this point, did Potion only do heal 20 in this format?
Yep.
So this was better than Potion if you want to go that route. So you would use these to keep your ultra tanky Steelix alive. Steelix had a particularly good weakness and really, really good resistance in this meta, being resistant to Psychic. A lot of Psychic Pokemon could hit, like mainly the Carnivore is what I'm thinking of, but you had a couple others. But the fire weakness wasn't super relevant until it was. With SPs primarily didn't run a lot. There was a fluky counter. that Erik ran into. But just to go over the other aspects of it, you had to set up Pokemon in Pachirisu with Call for Family that let you search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon, put them onto the bench. And then Smash Short's not a bad attack. If the defending Pokemon has a tool attached to it, it does 10 plus 30. And then you look at your opponent's hand, you discard any Pokemon tool card the same name you find there. So not a bad attack for a 70 HP basic for 1 colorless energy. But you're primarily just using this for Call for Family. And you would get your Onyx and you get Chansey into play. And then you would also heal your Steelix with Nurse Call from Blissey. It says once during your turn, you may discard a card from your hand. If you do, remove 2 damage counters from one of your Pokemon. You can't use more than 1 Nurse Call Pokepower each turn. And this power can't be used if Blissey is expected by a special condition. So this would just allow you to slowly heal your Steelix up. And kind of just go from there. And your opponent might be able to get through one of these, but Steelix is only worth 1 prize card. So you could honestly chain these fairly effectively. You don't run a whole lot of recovery, but None. You don't really need it, Yeah, I guess you don't run any. Sorry. But once you do get these guys set up, if your opponent knocks out the bench sitters of Pachirisu and maybe the Blissey, they still got to deal with the behemoth of Steelix. The rest of the deck's pretty straightforward from there. You just have some draw supporters and Pokemon's Professor Oak's new theory, which is shuffle, draw 6. Engineer's Adjustments, which is discard an energy from your hand, then draw 4, which was synergistic with Energy Stream. You had Volkner's Philosophy. You said you can discard a card from your hand, then draw till you have 6 cards in hand. And then you had Judge to just kind of the only form of hand disruption that was supporter based in this format, as far as I know. The Pokemon communication was just to help, and then you had a couple things like plus power to buff your attacks. So with Expert Belt and a plus power, you could, I guess 2 plus power, but realistically, it was just for the couple of reaches. There's a couple of times of just math fixing, where like 10 extra damage would be enough to one-shot stuff that I would not be able to knock out normally.
The big breakpoints there are like Gardevoir level X has 130 HP. Dialga G level X, which could be a real thorn in the side for this deck just because it has the ability to send energy to the Lost Zone and can also take advantage of that special metal energy. So it becomes equally tanky and has the ability to remove your energy potentially faster than you can get them loaded up to really take a one-shot. So if you do get the ability to get a 5 energy Gaia Crush set up, you want to be able to go over the top of whatever defenses that Dialga has built up and get it out of the way as quickly as possible.
Yep. So the last thing is just that call energy, which we've talked about in the past, but it's basically gives your Pokemon an extra ability to where they can just use this energy. If it's attached to an active Pokemon, you can just search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon and then end your turn. It's 2 basic Pokemon, put them on your bench, and then end your turn. So it's basically essentially another Call for Family, but you can put it on any Pokemon. And then Uxie for setup, which is pretty common in a lot of decks. Steelix, this deck, while it may seem simple, it takes a little bit of skill to pilot, a little bit of luck, if you will, to get some heads on your healing cards. When I played Erik, I did play Erik, not in this World Championships, obviously. It was a little bit before I started playing Pokemon, but we did have a retro event last year at NAIC, and I played Erik in the finals, and we had a really good back and forth game. And I think it was just one game. Like, we didn't get time to finish the best of 3 set. I think we just had one complete game, and the time expired from what I remember. But basically, he was getting unlucky on his head flips for the healing, and I was able to take the first knockout with a Gallade. I was playing Gardevoir, and I think I got a Dusknoir KO. I was able to use Dusknoir to once a Steelix was in range to bring down a Dusknoir that he had retreated and knock it out.
Gotcha.
Something like that. Does Dustnor do that? That might be
No, the
misremembering.
bring down is Gardevoir level
The
X's
Gardevoir
attack.
level X. So I did use that. I remember using that, but I did use Dustnor's attack because I think it.
It
What is
places
Dust?
counters.
That's what it is. So that
Yeah.
was like getting around all the special metal energy by using the effect of the attack instead of attack damage. So,
Yeah.
but this is like a really, I'd say if you're like new to this format, this would be a really good introductory deck. I don't feel like the strategy is overly complex, to be honest. Um,
Right.
Once you get it up and running, this deck kind of takes care of itself. The main thing was just be, managing your bench, making sure your opponent doesn't have like opportunities to win, and then just not overextending too far early game, so you have resources to prevent your opponent from doing what they're trying to do.
Yep. And then
Later
it becomes just like a sequencing thing, more or
on.
less, with with discarding the correct energy with engineer's adjustments. And the thing that I think that is kind of easy to overlook in the construction of this is just the fact that it doesn't play a basic search supporter, which
Mm-hmm.
most other decks in the format did. And so, from the looks of things, Erik was really trying to take advantage of the Luxchomp and Gardevoir matchups in particular, just because Luxchomp's not going to be able to get through a Steelix. It just does not have an attacker that can hit hard enough, frequently enough to get through that thing. And taking 6 prizes going around Steelix is just not going to be a viable strategy at the end of the day.
No, eventually you get to a point where you have to go through Steelix. Like you just make sure you don't bench too many things, and realistically, you don't have enough stuff to bench. But once you
Right.
get 2 Steelixes set up with a couple special metal energy and then maybe a Blissey healing, you're not really threatened by a whole lot.
Nope.
So
And then in that
yeah.
Gardevoir game, just like a couple of heads flips
Oh
probably
yeah,
turns
I
the
was
game on its head.
100%. He must have hit like 5 or 6 out of
Jeez.
7 or 8 on like tails out of all the coin flips. It was very one-sided, but I mean that's the risk you run with running coin flip
Absolutely.
cards. There's like other things you could be doing. I think Blissey Prime is in this format, right? So
It should be.
but
But that discards all your
that
energy.
discards all energy. But like that's not the worst thing ever.
No.
You have ways to recover that. But
yeah, if you're looking to innovate, maybe that's worth consideration.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not quite smart enough. I'm not smarter than Erik, but that's the cool thing about if you go back and look at a lot of these decks, people were they don't have the same resources we have now as far as like deck building goes. Like you don't have all of the deck lists from a tournament at the touch of your fingertips. We were really relying upon trying to figure stuff out on your own.
Yep.
And that's what Erik did here. I think that's why his deck, even though he got like a pretty relatively lower finish at this World Championships, it still sticks out to a lot of people because it's so innovative and not like he's not breaking the mold on making Pokemon, but just nobody was playing Steelix at this time. Like nobody was thinking to play Steelix.
No, I can pretty much guarantee that he was the only Steelix deck at this tournament.
Right, and that's the way Erik's always been, where he's trying to take a deck that's been cast aside or not even thought of to really and make it his own and surprise people by playing it. I was talking with Aaron before the podcast. I worked with Erik last year. He hasn't been playing much this season, but he was playing a little bit last season, and I played with him. I roomed with him at NAIC last year, and he was working with a couple other people on a Sinestia deck, which didn't have quite the same success, but he was adamant about it being good and about trying to make it work. And that's the thing, is we don't really see a whole lot of players that try to go off the beaten path and figure it out on their own. So it's always cool when you see that happen. And I'm glad we got to talk about one of those players and one of his decks today. So
for sure, definitely. So stay tuned. Next week we'll come back with some more 2010 coverage. But just to keep things trucking along this week, we're going to jump straight into our Blaine's Quiz Show segment. And so, as things go, John and I bounce back and forth asking each other multiple choice questions. So John will have 3 multiple choice questions to answer. Each correct answer will award him with 1 point. He will have 1 hint available throughout the duration of those 3 questions. And if he is able to answer all 3 questions without utilizing his hint, he will earn an additional point. So a bonus point, which would greatly aid him in catching up after my big old goose egg coming out of last week. But without further ado, we're going to jump in with the category this week of reprints. So, John, you think you're ready for your first question?
Ready as I'll ever be. Let's go.
Here we go. So, Dunsparce from Sandstorm is a rather iconic card, but I want to know what Sun and Moon set was it reprinted in? And your options are Forbidden Light, Cosmic Eclipse, Celestial Storm, and Lost Thunder.
I can picture the card in my head. It's got Strike and Run. I know it's not Forbidden Light or Lost Thunder, so I'm like between Celestial Storm and Cosmic Eclipse. I want to say Cosmic Eclipse. I think that's probably a little bit later. I think it was, just a little bit later in the Sun and Moon era. So lock in Cosmic Eclipse.
Okay, that's a good guess. You had narrowed it down to the correct answer and one other, but unfortunately the answer to this one was Celestial Storm, and you are totally right. This was the Strike and Run Dunsparce. Its secondary attack being Sudden Flash, which for the longest time in the Ruby Sapphire based formats was a thorn in the side of players, paralyzing their actives repeatedly. Nice try on that first question. Let's go ahead and get into question number 2. I want to know how many reprinted cards were part of the Classic Collection featured in the Celebrations expansion. And your options are 25, 22, 27, and 30.
Okay, I think this is deceptively easier than you might think on original guess. I think they did 25 because it was the 25th anniversary of Pokemon for this collection. Because we're reaching the 30th anniversary coming up next year. So I'm going to lock in 25.
Yeah, your logic's perfect, John. It was indeed 25 for exactly that reason. And the weird thing is, when I went back and looked at this list, it wasn't evenly spread throughout the different eras.
No, they
of
did a lot
Pokemon.
of black and white stuff too.
There was a good number of black and white things. There weren't very many like early EX era cards, like the whole Ruby Sapphire section. There were a lot. It gets kind of skewed because they had Charizard, Blastoise, and Venusaur, and to really do the far back Wizards era cards, and then they had I think like 3 or 4 more Wizards era cards as well to kind of round things out. But that took up a pretty big chunk of things, all things considered. But yeah, good job, good logic. You're getting through these pretty quick this week, though. So let's see if you can't come out strong with a 2 out of 3.
Let's hope so.
So for our final question, how many times has base set Charizard been printed in English?
Man. Okay, so I already lost 1 point, so I think I'm going to have to use my hint here.
Okay, so the answer to this is an odd number.
Odd number, so 5 or 7. Okay, so you have base. Let's just go through it, I guess, in my head. You have base set 1, unlimited, and then you had base set 2. You had the premium edition, luxury edition, or whatever it was, like the $300 MSRP card. And you had, I think, the class, like we just talked about, the celebrations. I think it's 5, but there's gotta be 2 other chances, 2 other times. I'm just trying to think through it. In English, so it's been printed more in other languages, obviously.
Yeah, in Japanese there was a CD promo that was another version of the base set one. But interestingly, there are also English printings of this card that did not exist in Japan. So there's a second hint for you.
Huh. Okay, so I must be missing a couple if that's the case. So let's just err on the side of caution and choose 7 here.
Yeah, I probably made things a little bit too easy for you by giving you that second hint. It is indeed 7. Great. And so the base set Charizard was obviously printed in base set, and that's shared between both the English and Japanese versions of this card. But we had a couple of English exclusive expansions, which are things that Wizards are kind of, known for. So because since Wizards kind of dropped the game, we haven't really gotten these reprint sets, but we had base set 2, and which obviously featured Charizard. We also had Legendary Collection, which featured 2 different printings of this same card because it was available as a regular card in the set as well as a box topper. But
Oh, okay.
it was literally still the same card, but it had a separate numbering for that card.
Crazy.
Was then reprinted as a secret rare in Stormfront, and of course was featured in that Celebrations expansion. And then the final printing would be the TCG Classic collection that came out last year with the Charizard and Ho-Oh deck. So yeah, like I said, Japan never got base set 2. They never got Legendary Collection. They've gotten every other version of this card, but they also got that CD promo. So the answer for the Japanese side of things would have been 6. But
Gotcha.
yeah, good job, John. We're going to come out of this week with 2 points for you, and I will add our point totals right here because I did not prepare that ahead of time.
Now is it 2 back?
I honestly couldn't tell you. That's where
my
my handy numbers that just dinged in above our heads are probably going to do some lifting here.
Well, hopefully we'll look a lot smarter next time we do Blaine's quiz show. But
I think you look plenty smart this week.
Yeah, I was pretty confident. Cosmic Eclipse and Celestial Storm are like super close. CES versus CEC or whatever. So you get a mix up in my head once in a while. So I guess that's where it was. That's what I'm going to blame at least. But yeah, hopefully.
And I have to tell you that was entirely intentional.
Yeah. But I'm happy with it. Like 2 out of 3. I felt pretty good about that category.
Yeah.
But
I thought that there were going to be some more interesting questions. Like the Dunsparce thing is what kind of led me down that path. And I thought there were going to be other kind of cards that had been reprinted multiple times, and there just aren't. And
no, not really.
A lot of the ones that come up,
maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that would have been a good question. I should have gone with that. Like, how many times has Potion been printed?
Oh God, it's got to be like close to 20 now.
No, it's ridiculous. I'm pretty sure it's higher than that because we used to get those products. Like, you remember we would get like the kind of intro decks for people that were like 2 30-card products,
trainer toolkits or whatever,
and they both had individual printings of that because there would be like a Lucario set symbol and a Raichu set symbol. So that counts as 2 new versions of Potion.
Dude, that'd be a fun fact. Is like what trainer has been printed the most, like different versions of?
It's got to be Potion.
But it might be Professor's Research now. They've printed it a million times. With the Prismatic Evolutions, they printed it for all the generations. And they reprinted it in the newest set. They gave us 2 more copies of it there, I think.
Right. And I think we're getting... I believe there's at least 1 more printing in Destined Rivals as well.
Yeah, getting a Juniper.
Oh, yeah. And for Black Bolt White Flare, we're getting the Juniper one as well. And we've gotten full arts for half of them, too. So you might be right, but I don't know. Potion's probably still up there. It's been around since base set.
Yeah.
But cool. So that's enough dwelling on the past. We can go ahead and dwell on the much more recent past instead and look at the results from our Portland regionals this week. So the first thing we're going to look at here are just some of the kind of meta information statistics that we'd like to show to everybody here. And so our top 6 decks stay relatively similar. With Dragapult, Raging Bolt, and Gardevoir still being the top 3, Joltik Box being number 4, Flareon kind of rising up through the ranks to make it onto the top 6 this week, along with Goldengo still barely clutching onto that last spot on there, pushing Terra Box out as deck number 7. But I think the thing that I wanted to highlight, and the reason that I'm on conversion rates rather than just meta percentages this week, are the fact that the conversion rate for Joltik Box as the Journey Together format kind of came to a close has cooled off significantly. You know, when this deck first burst onto the scene, it was boasting conversion rates of 23, 24, 25% even, or almost always was over 20% at least. And now we've dropped down to just under 17%.
Yeah, and it is interesting.
Is that one of those things where people just, figured out the play pattern of the deck and are able to exploit it because it is so linear? Or has the number of players just decreased enough that we're not seeing as many of them make it into day 2?
Yeah, it's a good question. I could also say like maybe the number of top players playing Joltik Box has decreased a little bit, so they're really not able to. But like Joltik Box, I think has been kind of the go-to deck for players that haven't really put a lot of testing into the metagame.
Sure.
At least as a generalization, I wouldn't say that's the hard and fast rule, but overall that might be the case. So that might be part of it. But yeah, I could also see a world where a lot of like Dragapult and Gardevoir players have figured out how to play that matchup a lot more effectively. Now that they've seen it a couple times, maybe they
Hmm.
figured it out a lot more effective. Like saying, okay, yeah, you can get the first 2 knockouts, take your first 4 prizes, but then it's going to be really, really hard for you to close the game out from there.
Sure.
I'm going to unfair stamp you, or, um, if you're Gardevoir, just counter catcher something up like a Latias, and or if you knock out, I guess that it's not necessarily the best example, but if you knock out the stuff with energy early and they're not able to like recover from there, and draw the cards they need, like Boss or Crispin or whatever, it gets really hard for them to keep going.
Yeah. And we saw a pretty good show of that on stream. I know Henry Chow was featured on stream playing against Joltik Box at one point over the weekend, and he pulled off the play of, okay, I'm going to bring up your Iron Hands and KO it with Drifloon while I also Monkey Dory damage over and KO your Joltik on your bench. And then later in the game, being able to just move damage to a Pikachu to make it so Resolute Heart is no longer active, so it can get KO'd. Or I think the exact line of play ended up being was hit a Pheasantipity for 190 while also pinging the Pikachu for 30, and then being able to do the reverse of that on the following turn to take 4 prizes and just end the game. And
Yeah.
Joltik doesn't really have a response to something like that.
No, they have to. Some of them have been running Gravity Mountain, but it's only like a
Mm-hmm.
one of, and it's not really particularly easy to find.
Right.
Most of them, you're not running like Secret Box or something like that where you're able to necessarily get it. A lot of them are running Prime Catcher,
Mm-hmm.
Joltik boxes. So they really have no way to search out a stadium right now. So it can be really difficult to just find that when you need to knock out that Gardevoir that one turn.
For sure.
And yeah, Gardevoir can just heal itself with Monkey Dory pretty much effectively, negating that strategy. Um, but yeah, it was I think Jolta Box is cooling down a little bit. It was kind of the hot deck for the second half of this format, and then now people have figured it out. But that's not to say that there's still no further innovations that could be happening. Um, and Azul was working on it before he, I guess, couldn't go to Portland. Um, so there's still like some players have some faith in it. I don't think it's going to fully go off the face of the earth like one of the other decks we might talk about here with Golden Go, or Chaladon even, um, kind of falling
Yeah, I
off.
mean, we've seen the trend for a while now of Archaladon converting pretty poorly, and I think the play rate of the deck has finally descended to kind of match that more or less.
Yeah.
To where, we were still seeing 50, 60 people bringing the deck to events and converting in single digit numbers at that time. And so now to have it drop to just over 30 copies, I think that that's pretty par for the course. The big kind of shocker for people might be that Goldango has similarly kind of fallen off the face of the earth, even though we talked about this a little bit last week when we did our tier list. And I think a large part of this shift further downward has to do with that top player play rate, more or less, where a lot of the day two converters of Goldango that did maintain kind of that higher conversion rate that we were seeing were due to the, John Angs and Caleb Rogersons of the world that were bringing that deck to events consistently, instead opting to play different archetypes this week, including, Caleb was playing that Terrabox deck, and we can see Terrabox converted extremely well this week, being easily the highest converting deck of, over even 20 players, but let alone having over 100 copies of the deck in the room and having almost a third of them make it into day two is pretty crazy. Like, those are better than the Joltik box numbers that we were seeing when that deck first came out.
Yeah, yeah. And we talked a little bit about Terrabox, thinking it's a better play for this weekend. Then it's getting better and better as like our Chaladon, falls off and Golden Go falls off. Terrabox has a much better matchup spread from there. With like Lily's Clefairy helping your Raging Bull matchup. And you're able to really bully the setup decks with Teal Mask. But I think other deck, I think it's also in my mind, it's like a case of what decks are the top players playing, and like that's what that number shows me more than Terrabox. It was a good call for the meta. We're not going to say otherwise, but I think the number of players that like are consistently making day twos, like I think the rule of thumb is like a really well seasoned, skilled player who's put the hours in, who's put the work in, understands the deck, understands the matchups going into the tournament, can basically make day two with any top meta deck, like any of the top, basically Zoroark and up, in my opinion,
Sure.
is where we're at right now. So the fact that, like, sure, it's better positioned than it might have been at the start of the format when people were expecting it. Now people aren't expecting Terrabox, aren't teching for it. Now we can sing it, kind of have a resurgence in the last few tournaments of this format.
Yeah, and then the other big kind of push that Terrabox got, and we've talked about this a little bit previously as well, is that there's some more diversity coming in the A-Spec slots of both the EV decks and the Dragapult decks, where at the very beginning of this format, all of the successful lists for both of those decks were running Unfair Stamp, and that's a card that Noctowl-based decks just hate sitting across from. But now we've seen some pressure be put on these Dragapult lists that have forced them to find other options, and we've seen people still include Unfair Stamp a good percentage of the time, but we've also seen some people convert back to playing Sparkling Crystal, or even some players opting to include Neo Upper Energy as their A-Spec of choice. And then the EV decks have largely converted back to playing Sparkling Crystal as the primary, and I'm pretty sure only A-Spec that anyone who's converting into day two is running, just because it's more efficient for them to be proactive in their gameplay rather than trying to rely primarily on a reactive strategy. And Terrabox is able to take advantage of that since it gets to maintain its hand size more effectively more often.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point, Aaron.
Yeah, I think that's just about enough about our conversion rates. Then we can go over here now and look at the standings from the event. And we get to see that Michael Davidson and Henry Chow faced off in a Gardevoir mirror. That was, in fact, a same 60 mirror match heading into the finals of this event. And we're going to take a look at that list a little bit later, but we'll first run through the rest of the asymmetrical top cut here. So we've got Raging Bolt from Christian Fontenot, Terrabox from Caleb Rogerson, Gardevoir from Piper Lapine, Flareon Box from Taylor Whalen and Owen Dalgard, Joseph Mused with Straight Pult, Dominic Viola and John Eng with Dusk Pult, Connor Miller with Flareon Box, Ray Chen with Toedscruel. Yep, you heard that right. That's a Toedscruel. Callie White with Terrabox, and Sebastian Lashmet rounding things out with Dragapult Pidgeot, of all things. And so the first deck we're going to take a look at here. Well, before we take a look at decks, what stands out to you here besides the Toedscruel, John?
Yeah. I think the fact that, like, what I was thinking as you were reading this is, like, I'm trying to remember the last time we had a same 60 mirror in the finals of a regionals. It's been a while.
I think it was Portland last year.
With John Eng.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. I think that's really cool. Is, like, Michael and Henry are really close friends, testing partners, all that. I think that was my takeaway. Is just like, it's insane to me how well, how successful of a season Henry's having, but the fact that he's also buoying, I can't say that, buoying other players to top performances alongside of him. We've seen it with, like, what was the player from Europe? I forget his name, but basically taking Henry 60, and we saw it with Isaiah Bradner doing it, I think, at one point. So Henry's definitely, like, not afraid to collaborate, not afraid to tell people exactly what he would be playing for a tournament, and, like, giving them the same list and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's really special and really cool. We don't really see it too much. Like, we used to not see it ever. I feel like,
No.
like,
everything used to be a secret back in.
Yeah, we did have play testing groups that would run the same 60 for tournaments. I think primarily I'm thinking of, like, not even that long ago, Raul, Bradner, and Reagan Retzloff and John Eng would kind of just run the same 60 for every tournament,
Sure,
for a while. And before that, we had, like, DDG and I don't know, all that kind of going on. And
there's still some smaller, probably more isolated cells of players that will definitely collaborate together and work on lists and bring those same 60s to events. Like we saw, Christian Fontenot and All Out Blitzel brought the same Raging Bolt deck to Atlanta as an example, or Sebastian Lashman has been working with Karis Jones for this entire format on various Dragapult lists, or Rowan Stavinow and Tanner Hurley have been collaborating on Dragapult for the Journey Together format. And so I think that it's a matter of the thing that highlights to me is that the players that are consistently having more success are the ones that are collaborating with other people, and that demonstrates that two heads are better than one, and you're very frequently going to be able to get further in an event by having a sounding board or a testing group to bounce your ideas off of or play games with. So
Yeah.
don't trying to lone wolf things is kind of a relic of the past in Pokemon.
Yeah, it definitely is. We talked about Erik in the time capsule, but there's like, other than like maybe the most like recent example would be John Roberts the second, last tournament in
Sure.
Milwaukee. He's kind of the lone wolf that comes to mind in the most recent format. But for the most part, and the cool thing with Henry though, I feel like, is that I've seen him basically help anybody that's asked, or like not anybody, but a large range of players. It's not the same testing group every time. It's, Michael Davidson's maybe tested with him all season, but he's not afraid to help other people that just ask for help. And I think that's special. That's unique.
Yeah, kudos to Henry for sure. And
Yep.
with that being said, the other things that kind of stand out to me are, so we saw the uptick in the play rate of the EV box deck and the conversion rate of the EV box deck, and we still see three of them make it into top cut on the asymmetrical side, with two of them converting into the final top 8. But other than that, we've got a pretty nice spread of decks here. So we've got 3 Gardevoirs, 3 of which all converted into top 8 proper, 4 Dragapult decks, but only one of them making it into top 8, and then the Terra box making up a couple more of those slots, with Raging Bolt really kind of falling off despite winning the last North American event. So, yeah, with that being said, I think we can go ahead and jump into some deck lists. And first up is going to be that Gardevoir list, which is going to look very different from the last deck that we saw coming out of that Henry Chow camp in a lot of ways. We don't see the Zoroark. We still see what I would say is, Henry Chow's trademark card in Secret Box.
Mm-hmm.
Has kind of proven itself as the premier A-Spec for Gardevoir decks, but the real standout things are 3 copies of TM Evolution and this 1/1 Rabska line.
Yep, and we go back down to 2 monkeys in this build. So that's a big departure, I'd say. But yeah, this is a less turbo version compared to the Brent Tonneson, going back to TM Evo. And then, yeah, you have probably the new technology of this format, of this tournament, rather, in the Rabska, which, if you're not familiar with Rabska, don't be too ashamed. Just to read it real quick. Basically, it's a 70 HP stage 1 Pokemon that evolves from Rellor and has the ability Spherical Shield. It says prevent all damage from and effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to your benched Pokemon. So this is primarily played as a Dragapult counter, to prevent any bench damage being placed on your bench whenever this is in play. But it can also be used in a lot of other matchups. It doesn't just prevent effects of attacks; it prevents attack damage. So it can prevent the Raging Bolt, the Baby Raging Bolt. We've seen a huge uptick in that, and then we've seen, we talked about Teal Mask Ogre-Pon, so it prevents that damage too. Just to your Curlias and Ralts early game. So, yeah, definitely more of a TM Evo centered build than we've seen in the past few tournaments. I think Henry did run a TM Evo build with Zoroark, right?
Yeah.
And had 2 in that.
That I'm not positive on. I'd have to go back and look at the list. But I know for this one in particular, like, he called out or shouted out William Azevedo for inspiration on the deck with his TM Evo list that he won with last week down in the LATAM regional. But the Rapska, in my mind, applies to almost every single top tier matchup that this deck would face. So you stop Screamtail damage in mirror matches. You stop the Phantom Dive damage, obviously, against Dragapult. You stop the Baby Raging Bolt, like you said. But you're also stopping effects of attacks. So you actually prevent Angelite from coming into play against the EV-based decks, which, when you think about, a lot of people think about Rapska and you're like, okay, it's bench barrier. But when you're stopping something, like, one of the only plays that the EV decks typically have against Gardevoir is, okay, if you get a Gardevoir out and you power up, a 3/4 energy Screamtail or a Mew or, even a Drifloon, the big play is, I'm going to get your Gardevoir back to the bench along with the thing with all the energy on it and put all your energy and your Gardevoir back in your deck. And if Rapska just comes in and says, no, you can't do that, makes the game a lot harder.
For sure. There's no real easy way to turn off Ravscope without knocking it out, and if that happens, you're taking one prize on this thing.
Exactly.
And then they're able to just super rot it back in and TM Evo if they want to go that route. But even then, if they're just taking one prize, Guardy will take that trade most times. It could just go from there. But
Yep.
yeah, I mean, this is just a very consistent build. You only run the one buddy Poffin, which is interesting. So I guess you're still focusing on a heavy artisan
Mm-hmm.
build and just having a slower setup, but getting that TM Evo. Hopefully, you're still burning through your deck with Ionos and researches, and then just getting set up by just drawing into your Pokemon primarily. But the TM Evo just helps you get out the Pokemon a little bit faster. Like all you need is like one Poffin, I guess, turn one, and you can get your setup going.
Exactly. Yeah, and Gardevoir is still, it and Dragapult are the best decks at making a comeback when they're down prizes.
Oh, for sure.
Very easily. Yeah, we can jump from the, even though this was a winning deck, we had a couple other decks pop up in this event. And so Caleb Rogerson did bring Terra Box to the event. And realistically, this list is pretty vanilla and almost exactly what I would expect somebody to bring to Atlanta this year. So just your 4/4 Noctowl, 2 Rotoms, 2 Wellspring Ogerpon, 1 Ditto, 1 Teal Mask, 1 Pikachu, Terrapagos, Clefairy, Blood Moon, Latias, Mew, and Pheasantipity. So not taking the page out of Daichi's book and including the Badoo in the deck, instead opting to keep that Ursaluna around for that Raging Bolt matchup. I guess the one big difference in the pickup from Daichi's deck that was not a guaranteed inclusion in this deck initially would be the copy of Briar.
Yeah.
And being able to set up some interesting plays with something like Briar Countercatcher with Wellspring and taking 3 prizes with a Wellspring on, some easily snipeable Pokemon, or if you softened up an EX, being able to take a 4 prize turn with a Wellspring is a pretty cool play that you may be able to manage with the deck. But other than that, it just looks consistent and pretty straightforward, kind of par for the course in my book.
Yeah, lots of one-ofs, which you're able to get to with Noctowl. I like the jamming tower a lot right now.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely feel like you need that going up against Raging. Well, I guess Raging Bolt does run a couple, like one or two copies of Bravery Charm, but more for the Guardy matchup, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like a consistent strategy at this point. You're down to now 1 Teal Mask Ogerpon. I think that's a big change from Atlanta.
Sure.
Yeah, so we've seen that cut down way down. More of a focus on using the Pikachu's and Clefairies than Teal Masks and Terrapagos, I'd say. And yeah, the Wellspring is probably one of your better attackers right now.
Of course, yeah. You open almost every game with that thing, and like you said, we're like primarily focused on Crispin as our form of energy acceleration, rather than Teal Dance energy switch and trying to do that over and over and over again. It's a lot easier to just take my 1 card and make it effective rather than having to do a 2-card combo every time. Yeah, no, still a strong deck, and I expect it to see more play in the next format.
That's fair. Yeah, I think it doesn't really lose a whole lot, other than maybe you have to worry about bench barrier from Shaman coming out.
Yeah.
But realistically, we'll see a lot of setup decks still pervasive in the next format. So this will definitely be able to take advantage of that and still have really good matchups red overall. And that's the nice thing about this deck is you can innovate a lot with it. Like say you're struggling into a certain matchup, you can just say, okay, well, I'm going to take out the Blood Moon because it's not doing enough at this point, and put in, something like a Volcarona or whatever, something like that, just to help deal with certain matchups and certain situations that come up.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing will be if we see any direct inclusions that are able to help with the Gardevoir matchup in particular, as that becomes increasingly more difficult. One, if they still opt to just go Evo Rabscup, because that seems really hard to deal with, or they can just play the Shaman now. So it depends on which ones is or isn't necessary, but I expect some form of bench barrier to be present in many more decks heading forward.
Yeah, and if that's the case, it gets really difficult to deal with in some ways. But we'll see. Yeah. I mean, that's the nice thing is you can still innovate quite a bit with this deck. You can be a 1 prize deck early game and then switch up and be a 2 prize deck. Well, maybe not so much this version, be a 1 prize deck because you do want the Terra Pokemon and play relatively soon, so you can use your Jewel Seekers.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. I haven't really spent a whole lot of time with this, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they go from here.
Definitely. And even with the bench barrier in play, people still have to get it out.
Yep.
And that is not always possible or easy to do.
Yeah.
And so you can take advantage of those slower starts by being a fast, aggressive, consistent, turn 1, turn 2 deck, and just get out the gates and put your opponent on the back foot.
Yeah, and Shaman's a lot more limited than we've seen other bench barrier Pokemon.
Sure.
only preventing basic Pokemon from being affected by attack damage, right?
No, non-rule box. Non-rule
Is it?
box.
Okay.
Yeah, you can still hit. You can hit evolutions. You just can't protect your Pheasantippities and other EXs. All your Terra guys are still safe, but
okay. Yeah,
but
well, that's a given.
Yeah.
I was just thinking. Okay, never mind.
You're good. To look at another Noctowl deck.
All of that up.
We'll read more, or we'll learn more about that Destined Rivals format next week because I believe that we've got a small-ish tournament that we can talk about heading into next week with that Full Grip Games event. But before we get there, we've got another Noctowl deck to look at here with an EV box from Taylor Whalen, making it into top 8, and we see the inclusion of the Umbreon, like what we saw from Melbourne last week. And I guess I've been converted, John. I was not a fan of the Umbreon last week, but after putting some games in with it, playing some EV box, that I've tried to tailor a list going into what I expect the Destined Rivals format to look like, and just playing it on the current Journey Together format on ladder. And the Umbreon has been more impactful than I thought it would be, in all honesty, at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is it just as a Guardy to counter? That's all it's really there for.
That is literally all it's for, is being able to one-shot a Guardy.
I mean, that's huge right now. I mean, Gardevoir has proven that it is, top 2, if not the number 1 deck in format right now. And I think that this weekend cemented that in this format, at least. Maybe it changes with Grimmsnarl coming out next format, but I think Gardevoir is finally like taken its throne and wears the crown now for sure over Dragapult. But yeah, I like this list a lot. Just a lot of one-ofs, a lot of different types of energy. It's kind of cool though. We see just so much versatility. The EV deck, it takes a little bit more skill than the Terra. Well, maybe not different, but just different. Knowing when to use Sylveon, knowing when to pivot and start taking knockouts and doing more damage.
I think both decks are honestly pretty skill testing, and Noctowl as a card is pretty skill testing, and that's why it's added that kind of layer of depth into even Raging Bolt of all things. But knowing exactly what combination of cards to take off a Fan Call is a little bit more of a decision in this deck than it is in the Terra box, because you also have the option of potentially getting up to 2 EVs out, and then knowing which energies you want to get with Crispin is a bit maybe more important here, because half the time in the other deck you don't care what you get because you're going to put them back in the deck with Torrential Pump anyway. Whereas here you need to know specifically, okay, well, I'm going to probably go get a Fire and then another energy for Carnelian, but I need to figure out which one I have in deck remaining, so when I Burning Charge I can have it out to set up my secondary EV on my bench. If it's an Umbreon matchup, you're a little bit more flexible because Umbreon for the most part is just using Moon Mirage for a dark and 2 colorless. But I've had a couple of games where I end up using Onyx to win the game, and you have the energy in your deck to fulfill that attack's requirements.
I couldn't even tell you what Onyx does.
You discard all your energy and you take 1 prize.
Oh yeah.
And so just on a turn where you're down to 1 and you don't have access to a Gust, you can still just say, I win anyway.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, no, it definitely takes a little more resource management and price checking in this deck than the other one. I'm curious, did you run Serrano before this tournament? Like, was that a new addition? I know Ian Robb ran it in his list.
But Ian actually ran Brock Scouting.
Okay,
and
sorry.
That was the one that I had taken to an event, but after the event that I played that in, I did make the swap for Cyrano. I'm actually flip-flopping on whether or not I want the card in the deck, but I actually really like it in here for the most part, just because it lets you go grab an EV Evolution and an EV EX, and then you could go grab Latias or Mew or Terapagos or just something, like whatever you need, really. Like it's got a lot of versatility, whereas, if you compare it to other decks you're just grabbing, like 3 Archalodons as an example. Like, it's not very useful. Whereas here,
Yeah.
you've got enough versatility and enough of those one of cards that a card that can just go grab 3 of them in one go is pretty effective, for
Yeah,
sure.
that's fair. Yeah, it helps you, I guess, build up a big bench for Area Zero to use Clefairy
Yeah,
or something like that. Lots of different factors. Yeah, it definitely helps with
definitely.
like a turn two if you get like an energy attached to an EV turn one, and then you can go
Mhm.
okay Flareon, and then get another EV on the bench, and then power that
Exactly.
up. It helps a lot with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of what the big Cyrano play is typically. Is you can go Cyrano for Flareon EVEX Latias and retreat into your Flareon for free. Get your second energy on your Flareon. Use Burning Charge to put 2 energies on EV, and you're all set, ready to go. Probably took 1 prize and have 2 attackers staring your opponent down on
Yeah.
for their next turn.
Yeah, it is super nice that you can go like get most pieces off of one Jewel Seeker rather, you know.
Hmm.
Um, Definitely like if you get the one EV down turn one, you're feeling okay. Even if you miss energy attachment, energy attachment's key, no doubt. But
Yeah,
if you miss it, you still have the backup of the crystal. And then yeah, depending on what you need, what pieces exactly, um, you can get Terra Orb for one of the EVs, and then Crispin or something like that. So lots of different plays that open up with the access from Jewel Seeker. Such a
definitely.
powerful ability right now.
And again, like, this is a deck I expect to stick around in the next format, and it actually has the ability to kind of adapt to that format as it begins to emerge and evolve. So, in terms of, you can change your attackers. I mean, I know I don't have it pulled up, but there was another list this weekend that actually didn't run Sylveon or Umbreon, and instead opted to just play 2 Flareons and a Leafeon.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're saying, okay, I'm going to be able to knock out Gardevoir with Kieran. And it played Kieran and Black Belt and 2 counter catchers. So saying, okay, I'm going to be able to gust your Gardevoir up and KO it, or you have the Black Belt access to be able to Carnelian the Dragapult to one shot it as well. But it's interesting, and something where when your opponent's sitting across from you, there's a chance that you could surprise them potentially, if depending on what they expect to be walking into.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the type of thing that, I mean, I like to have that on my side going into a game.
Yeah, you definitely like you flip over Eevee and they're like, okay, well, what versions of Eevee are they running? And like that's the
Mm-hmm.
fun part is you get to like tailor your deck to the specific metagame you expect.
Yep.
And yeah, we'll see a lot more of Leafeon, I'd say, in the next format. So
And
that'll be
then
fun to check out. Yeah, let's get into the most exciting deck of this tournament for many people, myself included.
it's
Is the
probably the simplest one.
Yeah, true. Kind of a throwback in that way. We see Toedscruel EX as an attacker, as the main attacker in this deck. Um, and you'll be forgiven if you don't know what Toedscruel does. We'll pull it up and read it. It has a really good ability in Protective Mycelium. It says it prevents all effects of attacks used by your opponent's Pokemon done to all your Pokemon that have any energy attached. So definitely a nice Dragapult counter, and it also prevents the Angel Light we talked about a little bit ago. And it just has one attack here. For 2 grass, it has Colony Rush, 80 base damage. And this attack does 40 more damage for each of your bench Pokemon that has any grass energy attached. And so it's a 270 hit point stage 1 EX Pokemon. And the thing you pair it with is the Teal Mask Ogre Pawn, just allowing it to put energy on itself fairly easily. And yeah, you have a lot. Like you can get this up and running really quick. Turn 2, start swinging for a really large amount of damage, and it's not necessarily the easiest thing to knock out at 270 hit points. And there's a couple other things like you're saying, okay, well 270 is a lot, but it's not unreachable. Golden Go and Raging Bolts can knock that out pretty easily. And this deck has a really nice built-in counter, and the other Toedscruel that has Slime Mold Colony as an ability. This is a stage 1, 120 HP, just grasp Pokemon. But Slime Mold Colony says cards in your opponent's discard pile can't be put into their hand by an effect of your opponent's abilities or trainers. So you can still get around it with Sada, but Golden Go basically just shuts down at the side of this
Oh, yeah,
thing.
definitely.
And Raging Bolt gets a lot more difficult when you don't have access to energy retrieval. It's not as dire as it was last format, but it's still pretty rough, I'd say.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it's really just kind of positioning and drawing through your deck as fast as possible. You run, you know, what is it called? Iron Leaves EX,
Mm-hmm.
just as another attacker to potentially surprise your opponent, maybe early game or a turn where you don't have an attacker built up. You can use this to just put this in play and then bring it to the active attack. Where like if you don't have a Toedscruel set up, this would be able to do that, which is nice. And then Squawks for early. I don't have to explain what Squawk does. But yeah, the rest of it is just a lot of four ofs, a lot of consistency, a lot of draw through your deck. You run 4 energy switch, prime catcher, 4 area 0 underdeaths, just trying to build up your bench as fast as possible and keep it big. Not you just run 2 super rods, so you just want to bring back energy from the discard pile and kind of reestablish bench Pokemon after if your stadium gets bumped. And then I think one of the more controversial cards in this deck, one of the more hated cards, less seen play, is the bug catching set, which is a trainer that just says look at the top 7 cards of your deck and you can choose up to 2 in any combination of energy and Pokemon, grass Pokemon you find in this way. I think it's grass energy and grass Pokemon.
Right. That's
Yep.
correct.
So when you run 12 energy and let's see, 12,
It's 14 Pokemon.
14. So you have effectively 26 outs, so almost close, coming up on half of your deck. Whenever you play this card, you have really good chance if you're looking at the top 7 of getting an energy and then a grass Pokemon. And you really want to see Teal Mask pretty early, pretty often, just to reestablish and build up grass energy on your bench. With 4 Teal Mask on your bench and then a Toedscruel powered up, you're doing, let's see, 280, right? I can't math.
Yeah, with 5 energy on your bench, you do 280.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good number right now.
Yeah, and then with the 6th energy, you get to that 320 threshold to one-shot the Dragapult or Gardevoir. And then I think with like the bug catching set, because you have enough density in here, it fulfills kind of the same purpose that something like an Earthen Vessel would, in that it's not only able to find those energies, which you're running a good number of energies, so you should be able to select at least one most of the time that you bug catching set, but you also have the option to go get your Pokemon a good number of times. I think the interesting thing and kind of the surprising thing about this deck for me is that I feel like it runs too many items. I know that Badoo is kind of on the decline as the format has come to a close and people have more or less adapted their decks to it. So we've seen a lot of decks that have either gone down to 1 or even just cut the card entirely. Like if you go back and look at Henry Chow and Michael Davidson's Gardevoir deck, there's no baby Pokemon in there whatsoever because they're so TM Evo focused. But, maybe that's what made Ray's Toedscruel deck such a good call, is that they were able to get away with running 10 item-based search cards in their deck, as opposed to having to slim it down and running search supporters.
That's a good point. Especially you're only running the Super Rod as recovery, so potentially there's a world where Badoo just locks you out of the game late game if you're not able to get another attacker set up. But yeah, I definitely think we've moved away from the Badoo wars. We still see them from time to time and still have them featured in a lot of matchups. But yeah, I don't know. It would be fun to look at, see how many Badoo are in the top 8 of this one compared to Atlanta. It'd probably be a lot less.
Yeah. It'd be a tough thing to pull up right now.
Well, we might be able to
make it happen.
Okay. So we had the predictions from a couple weeks ago, but I think it's downstairs. Shoot.
No, we covered those, didn't we?
No, I'm saying we had one where we asked how many.
For how many Badoo there were. Yeah. I know early on. So if as I go through these lists, early on we had several the decks where 2 Badoo were featured. A lot of these Dragapult decks. I think all of these Dragapult decks are going to have 2 Badoos in them.
2.
2.
Two.
Come on. I know Tanner had 2. I know Hedrick had 2. And then Henry only had 1.
And one
So that's
in
still 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13 in the top 8 of
Yeah.
Atlanta. And then if we come over to Portland, we've got 2
out of all
in
of
top
them.
8. All of top 8. So I didn't count the asymmetrical here. I mean, if I count the asymmetrical here, that's 9 decks, but neither of these decks run Badoo.
Yeah.
And then if we go all the way down, we do get to include admittedly, a fair few more Badoos, probably because that's where all the Dragon Ball decks ended up falling. But it's still pretty fair to say that if you look at what decks ended up rising to the top, Badoo is just not present there.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Less of a emphasis on Badoo for sure.
And we've
So,
instead
who did Ray
seen
lose
these decks that have kind of
in
adapted.
Top Cut?
Let's go find out.
I'm just throwing
Caleb.
Okay.
And that seems admittedly like a pretty tough matchup. Like you can't one shot the Pikachu, so there's a chance that it gets to take 1 or 2 KOs on you.
Yeah, Pikachu would be tough.
Pikachu or the Wellspring could potentially torrential pump for multiple KOs and just like there's a chance that it just keeps Toedscruel out of play for a good bit. Caleb also has the option to just sit there and have a Terrapagos kind of run basics over early game.
Yeah.
And then because Ray's deck wanted to go wide anyway, that Lily's Clefairy has the potential to come in and clean things up too. So I could definitely see where that's a tougher matchup. You know, if we look at the rest of these games, the other loss was to Raging Bolt of all things.
Okay.
Oh no, wait, I'm on Caleb's. Other loss was to Dragapult, which I imagine is something to do with Dusknoir itself. Because I feel the Toedscruel only has 60 HP. So if you can't get an energy stuck on it in time, there's a chance that all of your Toedscruels can just be kept off the board as well. And there's definitely a chance that ended up happening. But otherwise, definitely it's a solid run for sure.
Yeah, definitely a deck where you want to set up as fast as possible. But it is interesting. I mean, we were on the 4 Nest Ball and 4 Bug Catching set, but we don't run any Poffin, which is interesting. I guess you just don't need it outside of, Toedscruel.
I mean, if all you're getting is the Toedscruel, you're just probably hoping that these cards, these other search cards, give you enough redundancy between those and Squawk and Research and Mew and the draws from Teal Dance that should be able to get you over the line to close things out or to set things up rather, so you can just kind of slam the door on things down the road. I mean, like we're talking through this enough that I should still mention that I do not expect this deck to see a ton of results moving forward. You know, it's one of those kind of interesting flash in the pan things that we see pop up every once in a while. And kudos to Ray for going on the run that they did, but I do not know if this is indicative of the deck's strength as a whole.
No, I'd be hard pressed to think of. I mean, we might see it come back once in a while. Like we always see rogue decks do well from time to time.
Right.
That's why we like playing. That's a fun part of Pokemon. But yeah, I don't know if the raw power of this is quite high enough or like if it's consistent enough. I mean, it's a pretty consistent deck. I won't deny that. But like we were talking, the Guardian matchup seems like it might be a little bit more difficult. Most Guardians are running a lot of Night Stretchers, so you're able to shut that down, which is nice. But assuming they run like one Super Rod, which we saw in the winning list, it could be a lot harder to go from there.
For sure.
So we'll see how it fares moving forward. But we're pretty much done with this format, Aaron.
It's
and we talked a little bit about our closing thoughts last week on our tier list video. But I want to hear your thoughts. Well, first off, I have a question. I want to play in a League Cup this weekend, but I'm woefully unprepared. I've been playing Dragapult primarily this format, but I'm questioning, do you think if I'm playing in a League Cup this weekend, can you honestly say, is Dragapult still a good play, or should I look at playing something else?
I mean, we're still seeing it make top cut at these major events. If it's something you're the most practiced on, that's probably like my advice for anybody is on this
Sure.
last weekend of League Cups, because this is the last weekend of League Cups for the season.
Just this Saturday too.
Yep, I would say go play whatever you're the most practiced with. But if you have a decent amount of practice with everything in the format, I'd be hard pressed to say, I'll admit we were probably wrong last week, and Gardevoir is probably the
Mm,
S tier deck in the format, and you should just be playing it.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I was more, well versed with Gardevoir at this point. But the truth of it is, I don't think it's impossible to learn in like a couple days, but it would be hard to get all my matchups like back to like a level of confidence that I have with Dragapult right now. But yeah, definitely, I think we were a little bit hasty to maybe drag it down after it didn't win the week before.
Hmm.
Um, but I think yeah, once we see Henry, we see top players come back with it every week, and if not win, get pretty close, and the conversion rates held pretty strong, and
Oh,
it hasn't really
definitely.
lost a lot of tools. We've seen it being able to be innovated on
Yeah,
more so than other decks.
we've seen 4 different lists win events now.
Yeah,
And
and then Brent's 60 has been so dominant since it's come out as well.
mhm.
Um, it, coming on as one of the most featured deck lists on Limitless. With a insanely long list of players playing it every week. So I'm sure this weekend probably only added to that. So yeah, it's been a fun format. I liked it a lot. I'm excited to see some new stuff come from Destin Rivals. I don't have high hopes that the Rockets engine is going to take off and do really well, but I'm excited to be proven wrong, and I hope I am, truthfully.
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like, well, we'll have to see. But
Yeah.
it just does not seem like it's quite there, unfortunately,
No.
which is really really sad because the trainer cards seem so good, and they just seem so powerful. But unfortunately, we're not going to get more cards to support the archetype. Like there aren't going to be more rocket attackers that get
Yeah.
produced before we start heading into these mega based sets in a couple of sets. So we're getting Destin Rivals this Friday. We're going to get Black Bolt White Flare over the summer before Worlds, and then I'm pretty sure our fall set is going to be the first mega set with the Lucario and the Gardevoir and whatnot. So this will be the end of owners Pokemon as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. Unless
For
they come up with some crazy addition between now and the Z and A, which I don't really see happening. But you
no,
never know. They might.
although
I don't know.
we could get the fall special set could be like Shining Owners, and it's every
Sure.
owners group gets like 1 or 2 additional
That'd
cards
be
and just
fun.
fully revitalizes all of these archetypes. Misty suddenly becomes the most dominant archetype in the game.
That'd be crazy. Yeah, Misty's was woefully bad at pre-releases, and I don't think will be much better in this new format.
No,
But hey, you never know.
no.
Somebody might do well with it. I'm a little hopeful, I guess. But
And we'll get a chance to see that this weekend. So
yeah, yeah.
what
Who's
they've
got
been
like?
what they've been
Go
doing,
ahead.
on release weekend. Full Grip Games up there in Akron, Ohio. Wow, up there in Akron, Ohio, is doing their release weekend event with I believe a $3,000 prize pool for their standard event on Saturday, and then they're also doing a similar prize pool for a GLC event on Sunday. So it'll be the first look that we get at this in a at least somewhat competitive. But it'll be a lot of people's rough drafts on lists, probably copying a lot of Champions League or City League concepts because we're only going to have a couple of days to test things out on TCG Live because I believe the set drops either tomorrow or Thursday online. So we'll have some
Mm,
online results to kind of read off of going into this full grip event, and then we'll get to see what are people able to get their hands on and put together ahead of that event, and then maybe use that to inform some decisions as we really kind of first take our steps into the Destin Rivals format.
yeah, and we'll cover it next week for sure. We should be getting a new pocket set this week too. At the end of this week, either tomorrow or Thursday, I think. Great.
Yeah, that one
Um,
drops on Thursday, and it is Ultra Beast based.
yeah.
So all you Buzzwole fans have something to feast on.
Oh yeah, and yeah, I think those are the big announcements so far. I've been testing for the Professor Cup, so maybe I'll go into that a little bit as we get a little closer to NAIC, just to fill some time, as we don't have a whole lot of tournaments between now and NAIC. So we'll talk about it. But yeah, I hope to hear from you guys. If you have anything you want to say to us or comment on the podcast, please do. We always love feedback, even if it's a little critical. We can take it. I promise. I won't cry myself to sleep tonight, knowing that somebody doesn't like how many times I say, or ah, or in a perfect world or something like that. I listen to myself every week, sometime, or not every week, but from week to week. And I like to think I'm doing okay, but I always want to hear people's takes on how I'm saying stuff, and if I'm mispronouncing something, I want to be told that, so we don't keep making a fool of ourselves. But even if you have good feedback, we like that too. I'm on Blue Sky. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me right now, at john.orgel at Blue Sky or whatever. But just search John Orgel, should pop up. And then Aaron's still at X. And then, yeah, just reach out to us through that. Anything you want to say, Aaron, before we close up?
No, we will have links to all of those socials in the description of the episode. If you're following the show on YouTube, please give the show a subscription on that page. Give a like to the episode. Leave a comment down below. Help other people find the show. And if you are on those podcasting platforms, share it with people. Give it a follow. And leave comments there as well. Helps other people find the show. We are just trying to spread that net as wide as possible so that we can reach more people with the content. But thank you for listening if you made it to the end of this week, and we will come at you next week on the Battle Frontier.
See you.